Beginning with tonight's animation extravaganza, we will be using Adobe Flash to do it. You can be a Flash lover, a Flash hater, or a Flash neutral. It doesn't matter. It's a tool that's going to work well for what we need. For doing the animation, when you launch Flash, it comes up with this screen. We have a bunch of different formats that we can choose. Theoretically, these new versions that they put above the demarcation here, HTML5 Canvas and the WebGL, should be better because they're new and they should be all kinds of happiness and glory, but they're not. So I would discourage you from using those right now until a future date when Adobe fixes it. In the meantime, we're going to go to the old standby of when you make a new file, we'll choose ActionScript 3 as our format because that one actually creates a file that doesn't crash when you try to run it. So we're going to go with that as our format. So that is the file type that we begin with. Now when Flash comes up, we have a timeline across the bottom. We will be using that in a moment. We have our property panel over here on the right, so it's contextual. Depending on what you have selected determines what shows up in that window. We have fill colors here, stroke colors here. I prefer to use the paintbrush for most of my content creation tools. If I click up here, we'll see we have options for different colors, so you can do all kinds of fun-filled, exciting sorts of things. Now, because we're using this in a very specific and limited capacity, we're not going to be animating on the main timeline. What we are going to be doing is building our animation that we work with inside what is referred to as a movie clip. So it's a symbol object. And when we do that, because of the fact that it is now a symbol, it will end up showing up over in our library over here in a moment. And when it's in the library and it's a movie clip, we have the option to export it as either a sprite sheet or as a PNG sequence, both of which are useful for our animation purposes. So that is why we are going to do that. So the way that we begin is we go under the Insert pull-down menu at the top of the screen and choose New Symbol. When I do that, it pulls up this option here, and I can choose, and there are 3 symbol types in Flash, but the one that we need for our purposes is the movie clip. Now, it's a good idea, give it a name now so it has a name as we go to work with it. And I am going to make mine a Cyclops today just because it's fun when he only has a single eyeball. You can animate a bird, a plane, train, automobile, whatever makes you happy with it. And then we hit OK. Now it comes up with the big wide open screen. Now when we go to build our animation, if we're curious about what size it is, we'll notice we're at 100%. So what we see is kind of the size it's going to be based on pixels. If it gives you satisfaction, you can pull up the rulers, go under View, choose Rulers. So when the rulers are up, we can see now our pixel dimensions on screen. So if I do something really big, oh look, now I have something big to work with. Well, he's not a Cyclops, he has 2 eyes. But if I do this, we'll notice that that is a rather large object. It's not something small. For the purposes of our project, our game animations and things that we're working with, we need things that are smaller. Somewhere in the neighborhood of kind of 50 to 100 pixels in size is more typical that we will want to work with. So I'll select that, hit delete. Now, when you are working in programs like Flash, it actually responds really well to drawing tablets. We can use pressure when we work with the brush, so I can press with the brush. I can get different sized marks. I can vary my brush size so I get a thin or fat line. And Flash has this, some love it, some hate it, I love it, feature when I make a line, if I have a shaky hand, it helps to smooth out my line, but it also adds in a variety of thickness to it. So whether you have the brush sensitivity turned on or not, you get this what appears to be more of a cartoon or painted line, so it doesn't look so geometric or computer based. So that's something that I actually enjoy when I am working with Flash. Now we choose our brush sizes over on the side over here. There's more to drawing in it, but we're less concerned about that this evening because we're just making small little sprites. So we're making things that are going to be more in the neighborhood of the 50 to 100 pixel size. So if I want to make my little Cyclops character, I can make the shape for his head. Now at the bottom of the screen I have a timeline. You'll notice it says layer 1. that should tell your brain that if it says layer 1, there's a really good likelihood I can have a layer 2 and a layer 3, and, well, for that matter, as many layers as I want. And all is good. So we can add in different layers. So there's a couple of different ways that we can build our animation here as we're going to work with it. Now, right now, my animation is 1 frame long. So if we think about it, as we've been working and processing before, we've been talking about frame rates and how it plays back at 60 frames a second and does all kinds of nice things like that. But we can also change the frame rate in processing. In Flash, we will notice that my frame rate is actually defaulting to 24 frames per second because that's the default. Now I could change that into 60 frames per second. It doesn't really matter. I just have to think about how many drawings I want to do and how that's going to correspond to the exported sequence that I'm going to work with here. So actually, I want my properties up. I'll need those in a moment. So right now I have my starting head shape. If I want to draw it the next frame for my animation across the bottom here, think of these as pages in a flipbook or pages in my animation. If I want to go to the next frame, it would be super convenient if I could just click there and start drawing, but I can't. I have to create an empty frame in which to draw. And I do that by either a pull-down menu, a right-click, or mastering a couple simple F keys on the keyboard. In this case, I'm going to encourage you to think about just writing down and committing to memory a couple of these F keys. It just makes it easier. F7 will give you an empty keyframe. So if I want to draw into the next frame, I hit F7. We'll see that now the playback had moved. My artwork went away and it's waiting for me to draw. Now the hard part is I can't really see what I did last time. And then I could hit F7 again and go, well, I think it's somewhere over here. And I can hit F7 again. And I can draw guessing where things are, but that's not really a useful way of doing it because it's hard to line things up. Now I see this red bar down in my timeline. It's called my playback head. And I can grab it where the numbers are, and I can drag it back and forth or scrub it to actually see my animation. And it looks like crap because I couldn't tell what I was drawing from frame to frame. And it would be nice, even if I'm redrawing my artwork completely from frame to frame to frame, to be able to see what artwork is there. And we have the ability to do that. So I'm going to take these frames, highlight those frames, and then I can right-click on them and say remove frames, and they go away. They're gone. Now I go to that next frame, and I can hit F7 on the keyboard. It inserts an empty keyframe. And down at the very bottom of the application Chrome, we will see there's a couple of little icons there. And one of those, if I rest my cursor over it, it comes up with the words onion skin. And when it does that, what that's telling me is it's going to allow me to see what is on my previous frame, which is really cool for animation purposes. I click and it's like, oh look, that's what it looked like on my previous frame. So now when I draw this time, I can actually try to keep my line fairly consistent. Hit F7. I can do the same thing again. And again. So I can now create these drawings that are much closer and tighter. So if you think about traditional hand animators, they worked on a light table. So they would do their initial drawings on translucent paper about the color of an onion skin so you could kind of see through, and they would then do each drawing frame by frame, being able to compare their drawing to the previous drawing. And that's where we get the term onion skinning. And I can turn it off. Now if I scrub the timeline, we can see how my circle is kind of alive, but it's not jumping all over the place, though I was progressively shrinking at each frame apparently. If I have some base animation going on here, so we can see, all right, it's moving. If I add in an additional layer to my animation, I click on the add layer icon, it looks like a page the same way it does in every other Adobe program for adding in a layer. It added in a new layer. Now in this layer here, I am going to create the start of my eyeball. Now I'm going to advance to my next frame and hit F7. Turn back on onion skinning so I can see where that eye was. Now I'm making it so my eye is going to close, and then it's going to do some weird stuff after that just because I can. That's part of the fun of doing frame-by-frame animation, is you have a lot of flexibility in what you do. So I'm actually creating my animation, so it almost creates the illusion that the eye has gone around on the head by adding in additional frames into my animation. Then I'm going to make it blank and start to reopen itself. Now if I turn off onion skinning and watch what I've drawn, you can see how it looks like the eye is wrapping around the head. So creating a frame by frame layering effect. I think I want to keep drawing the head shape a little bit. I don't like where it stops changing. So I'm going to resume working on the head layer again with the onion skinning. Turn that on. And as you build your animation, what you want to do is you just want to have some fun with it, make something interesting and engaging, so that as we build this and put it into and control it with code, we're going to make some pretty fun stuff. Because when you have all that movement occurring with the animation, it just gets more fun. Now, frame-by-frame animation, oh, I really don't like what I just drew in that one. Frame-by-frame animation is something that is acquired taste. It is something that if you do it, you realize it takes considerable amounts of time to pull it off, because it is a very labor-intensive activity. But I would argue that the rewards for it can be extremely gratifying, because the end results that you create are entertaining, engaging, and just fun to work with. Now, after you have line work done in your animation, you can work with it. Now I can see that my ending frame is a little bit different in size than my beginning frame, so I may need to correct that, or just know that that's how it's going to look. If I want to just see it keep playing, I can hit the loop button at the bottom, adjust the area that's going to loop, and then just hit play in my timeline, and we can see how it's moving around on screen. And there's all kinds of other things you can do within the animation. We could take all of the artwork that we have, we could reverse it so it plays in reverse, it plays forward, plays back, so then you get a seamless loop, and it can be fun that way. You can also use the paint bucket to start coloring things if you want to, so then you can start filling your artwork with color. So it's, oops. If you select the paint bucket and artwork is currently selected on screen, then it will automatically start coloring it. So it's a good idea not to have anything active when you're trying to decide upon what color you want to use. Now, it's possible to cycle through and move through frames in the timeline using the comma and period keys. So I can very quickly start filling this up as I go to fill it. And if I want to color my eyeball a different color, I can certainly choose something for that. Now, one thing when you go to fill colors, it sometimes is going to be an issue, especially if I just turn off a layer so we can see. If I have a shape that's not closed, if the shape you're working with is an open path, when you go to fill it with the paint bucket, it's going to have a really hard time filling it because it doesn't know what to do with what's there. So we need to close off that shape, or we can just cheat a little bit and fill just using, in this case, I can just cheat and fill it with the paintbrush tool. And I know that this one is going to be the same. So instead of trying to fill with the paint bucket, I can just use the paintbrush tool and just put a little bit down. And I know I'm going to be running into that because I didn't draw the shape in its entirety, so it's becoming necessary for me to use that paintbrush tool. Which isn't the end of the world. There's worse things that can happen with the animation. So if I have that, now I can add in more layers. I can adjust the order of layers, so if I add in another layer, so if he's going to have arms or legs or something like that, I could certainly add those in as well. So if I add in another layer, if I want to give him a platform to stand on, working on this new layer. So I could do that. Now, layers, I can just drag it down so we can very easily stick it behind. So we can see, ooh, he's not growing in relation to those, so those legs probably aren't going to work. I might need to do something else, or we decide that he's a floating thing, or we'll just leave him as a ball. So as you work your animation, you can figure out what you want, how you want, and how you want the different artwork to work out. And then once we have that done, we're going to figure out how to get it out of Flash and then get it into processing so we can bring it to life with code. Now that the animation has been completed, all kinds of magic, wondrous things have occurred, and you've made wonderful, rich, great visual experiences, and all is right with the universe. The way that we are able to get our animation out of Flash is by going to our library, and we'll see that is where our movie clip symbol that we created resides. And a simple right click in the library gives me a few options here. I can generate a sprite sheet. We'll look at that at a future date, but I also have an option to generate a PNG sequence, which is what we want to do. We're going to create a series of images out of here. So the sprite sheet and PNG sequence are nice features that are built into Flash. Now, I could make a layered file in Photoshop. I could build my animation as a series of layers, and then I could use one of the export options and layers of export layers to files, and I could do that. I just find animation in Photoshop aggravating. I find it's much easier to work with it. So we want a PNG sequence. So right-click on the symbol that you created in your library. If you see properties, you need to click over to your library. Then you right-click and you choose Export PNG Sequence. Comes up with this window. And now when I go to do this, I will want to pay attention to where I'm saving it. I will want to put it into some sort of folder or directory so I have access to it and so it doesn't just pollute my desktop, messy as it already is. So with that, I'm going to go into where I'll be working with it, and I'm going to initially just put my images here. So I'm going to say make a new folder. I'm naming it so I know what it is. I don't care about hiding my file extension. And we'll see where it says PNG Sequence. That is the only option available to us. So I didn't go under the File pull-down menu, but I did it from within the library. I right-click and choose Export PNG Sequence. Now I hit Save, and now it gives me an option. It says my sequence is 55 frames, and its width is 171 pixels, and the height for each frame will be 149 pixels, resolution 72, colors 32-bit. That is what is important. Now these other numbers and dimensions that we see here, we will want these later when we start working with it. We will need to know those numbers. So it's not a bad idea while you're doing this, when you get to this frame, is you just write that down. Now you can get info on your things later and do all of that. I just find it's really convenient to write these numbers down so I know it's 171. Now yours will vary to be whatever yours is, and your number of frames will be however many you made. But colors, 32-bit, that's really important because the 32-bit indicates we're now dealing with a transparent background. If I don't choose 32-bit, I don't get my full transparent background, and we want these to be a transparent background so I can animate them over whatever background color I choose. That just or whatever image I so choose. That just makes the whole world a lot better. So once I have all my settings done, I've chosen where it's going to go, I hit export, it made the frames. Now if I bop over to that window and we take a look at it, I go into that folder, go into Cyclops, we'll see there are my different images. And I can see they start at Cyclops 0001 and it goes all the way down to Cyclops 0055. So there's my 55 images. That's pretty, that wasn't very hard to render those out. So now that those are ready, now we're ready to actually utilize these with our sprite animation code. Now that the images have been made, over at the desktop we can see we have a folder of images. We're going to work with the sprite animation file, so that was an old example. I don't need those anymore. Like everything else, we put things in our data folder. So I'm going to get rid of everything that's currently in my data folder. So I'm just going to select it all and put it in the trash. Command delete gets rid of things when you're at the desktop level, automatically dumps it in the trash. Now I want to take all of these new images that I just made, and I'm going to put those into the data folder for sprite animation. So now I'll have a new animation that I get to work with here, so this will be fun and exciting. And once I have those images there, the next thing I get to do is I get to go into the sprite animation code, and I'll explain what the different lines of code are doing and how it's working. You will only probably have to change a few particulars to get it working in your project. Time to code. So here we go. In the sprite animation file, I'll see that now I have my Cyclops images, and a few things we'll need to change on this and it'll be up and running. One, we need to update the file that is being loaded. So what I'm going to do is go through things here a little bit. Previously, last class, we added single images. Now what we're going to do is load a series of images and put those images into an array. Once they're in an array, we can just say, show me the first image in the array, show me the second one, show me the third one, show me the fourth one, fifth, sixth, and in my case, up to 55. And then I go back and say, show me number 1 again, show me number 2, number 3, and it creates that looped animation. So the old files that you deleted out of the data folder were called face, and then they would be a bunch of zeros, a number, .png. So we're dynamically constructing the name of the image that, or the file that we're putting into memory with load image. So again, I have an array, calling it sprite images. And that array now is a series of frames. Now my animation this time, instead of being a paltry 23 frames, I was an overachiever this time and went all the way up to 55. So I'll change that up to a 55. So you need to match it to however many images you exported on yours. I don't know how many yours were. Yours could have only been 5, 10, 12. You could have been 70 or 100 if you were super excited while you were animating and just got on a roll and it was a lot of fun. So mine right now is 55. Now I need to change the name of what I'm loading because I know that my data, if I look there, it's Cyclops with a bunch of zeros and a 1 instead of face. So I'm going to change that to match my naming scheme. Now, when this load image command is issued, what it's doing is it's loading a file called Cyclops, and then it's putting a bunch of zeros, and then it's putting a number. The very first time it goes through here, well, I is 0, but it says, well, we're going to do I plus 1, so I'll do a 1 to match the file name, .png. And the way that it's doing that is the sneaky little thing called NF. And what NF does is it says, take this number and write it out as a 4-number digit. So it's number format, NF. So the next time through, instead of 3 zeros and a 1, it's 0002. Then it's 0003, 0004. And all these lines of code that I'm typing here, that's junk. If I don't delete it, my code will crash and the world will end and it'll be a tragic time. We don't want to go there. And now after I get up to, let's say, 009, after 009, I get 0010. So by formatting it to 4 characters here, it allows me to have 9,999 frames if I wanted. If I built an animation that was 9,999 frames long in Flash, I guarantee Flash would have crashed. I can't count that many times. It would have been anything past 5,000, and Flash usually gets grumpy. So doubling that guarantees it would have been really ugly. But this number formatting, because it's defaulting to a 4-number export as it named my files, we can see those 4 numbers. It's creating this sequence of word, 4 numbers, .png. So it's stringing all of that together, saying load image, that file. Last week we looked at it, we said load image, and we just put in quotes, we put the file name we were loading. This time we're dynamically constructing that file name so we can load, in this case, let's see, up to frames. So I'm loading 55 of them, which is pretty cool that it can work that way. So now I can load all of those images into my image array or sprite images array. And then I'm going to make a new sprite. Now if I scroll down and look at the sprite class, we can see it has an X and a Y. It has a width and a height. Well, this width and height don't correspond to my current one. My current one is now, I was a little sloppy apparently because it's way bigger than 32. And it is now 171 by 149. Again, you change yours to be what it will. Now if you do nothing else at this point, and I'm just going to move mine over a little bit so it shows up more in the middle of the screen. If you do nothing else except enter this in and then run your thing, you will see your animation run, provided you have named it correctly, put the files in the folder, specified the correct number of frames. So if I do that and now test my project, and we'll see it come up, we'll see there it is, and it runs. And it's going fast because it's defaulting to 60 frames per second. So if I want my animation to play slower, I may need to tweak my animation so it exports with more frames to simulate lower frame rate, or I have to change the frame rate to my movie. And both of these things are reasonably accomplished. But right now our goal is to just get it moving. Once we see it's moving, then that's kind of cool. So some of you whine and complain because your animations played too fast.
I wasn't whining.
So one thing that we can do is we can insert a line of code into it and say frame rate and then put in the desired frame rate. I put in the same frame rate that is with my Flash animation, so it's 24. If we actually have a project that's refreshing at 24 frames per second, it plays okay. It's better to build your animation with extra frames so that it effectively slows itself down, so that when you're actually doing your animation, because now if I look, we can see it's playing at a much, that's now matching what I built in Flash. The other option is, when I'm working in Flash with this, is to actually have these frames loop or repeat, so that each frame is, in essence, 2 frames long or 3 frames long. So if I were to make each frame here a double instead of a single, then it would slow it down. And one of the ways that I can do that in Flash is and this is something I wish you could just highlight a bunch of frames and do it, but you really have to do it one at a time, which kind of really is stupid. It's nice if we're in a real animation program. I want this to be 2s, 3s, 4s, boom, done. To extend these out, what I can do is, and it works best, it's kind of fastest to do it. I find it works best to do it at the end, but I click on a frame, because ideally I should be able to just highlight a bunch of frames here. If I hit F5, it'd be nice, and it extends it out, but it only extended that one frame. So if I click on a frame, I can hit F5. That now made it take up 2 frames, and now I can, but if I hit F5 again, it extends that frame out. So it becomes this annoying click battle of, I click on a frame, I hit F5, it becomes a double. I click on the next one back, it becomes a double. Double, double, and it's an extremely tedious process. And sometimes what you find is, if you know you're not going to actually draw or extend out the frames when you do it, it's better to just, instead of hitting, you do your drawing, you hit F5 2 or 3 times, and then you hit F7 for your next empty frame. And then that means you don't have to go through this later on, because this is really obnoxious. And once you do this and modify it and get it to play back and let processing play at 60 frames per second, then you probably are going to want to ditch that line that told the frame rate to slow down. So I'm now doubling it, so my total number of frames is going to be 110 or so, instead of being, which actually I think it might be more, because it's looking like I have tripled somewhere or another, because it's being odd. It's just a tedious process. After the long, boring, tedious, horrible process where I need an animation assistant, I do have all my frames doubled, so now they're 2s instead of singles. This is where Flash has dropped the ball in the animation world. That's why real animation tools allow you to make singles, doubles, triples with the click of a mouse. It's a much happier process. But it is what it is. Now I'm going to make my PNG sequence. I'm going to go back to, and I know the folder. I'm just going to actually select my data folder now, and I'll choose to put it in that folder. And when I do that, it says files already exist. Yeah, I'm overwriting those, and now I'll have 110 frames. And now I'll hit export, kicks them out, go back to processing, change 55 up to 110. And now I'm going to comment out my frame rate statement. Now we'll see that it's playing on doubles. So that's a decent amount. Now it doesn't seem like it's going spastic, ridiculous fast. It's only moderately fast. If you pay attention to how the frame rate's going in Flash, you can work with that. While you're working in Flash, you can set your project, so you can decide to set it at 60 frames a second, so that anytime you do hit play here, it's going to give you somewhat of a decent response. But I can see under my playback here, though I set 60, it's struggling to maintain that, and it's only playing back at about 38 frames per second. So we can't use that as a true guide. I mean, one way would be like, okay, so if you scrub it, I can probably get closer to 60 frames a second than just hitting play. And we play by hitting the return key or pressing the play button at the bottom. But while it's playing back, it is apparent, though, it's only managing to be at about 30 to 40 frames per second, 38 to 43. So it's not giving me my full 60 that I'm looking for. when I'm in Flash. But when I'm in processing and kicked it out of processing, we can see it is giving it to me at a better speed. So with the code, I load my files, change the number of frames that are loading, get rid of frame rate because now it's close enough it works. Now, the way that the sprite is animating is the sprite has a property called CurrentFrame that tells me what is the current frame it wants to display from my image array. So my image array is sprite images, and I say show me the current frame, and then I'm drawing it using the image command at a specific X and Y location. And then I make current frame go up by 1. And if current frame is equal to my total number of frames, then we set current frame back to 0. That's how we create the looping effect. So current frame each time it becomes 1, it becomes 2, it becomes 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, 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 blah. It's 110. 110 is now equal to the number of frames. Let's go back down to 0. So that's how we're able to keep cycling through this, where it creates that never-ending loop of frames. For those who are interested in optimized code, we have the modulus math operation, which is we keep the remainder, we throw out any other part of our division operation. And we looked at it at one other point in the book. We get to see it again. Current frame is equal to current frame plus 1 divided by the number of frames, keeping the remainder. So this now gives us a never-ending loop. Current frame keeps going up. We divide it by the number of frames. So up until the beginning, we get 0 through 110. At 110, well, 109 plus 1, that's 110. Divided by 110, that gives me 1. 1 has no remainder. That puts us back down to 0. And then we keep doing the math where we get a remainder of 1, a remainder of 2, a remainder of 3, because now 111 divided by 110 would be 1, remainder 1. 112 divided by 110 would be 1, remainder 2. Then we get all the way up to 220. 220 divided by 220 is, or 220 divided by 110 is 2, no remainder. That put us back down to 0. So this little one-line sentence creates this perpetual running loop where current frame keeps going up, frames is a fixed amount, and we keep getting a numerical sequence that is forever looping. So that's the one-line version of the multi-line version. Here, current frame plus plus, if current frame is equal to frames, set current frame back down to 0. If that one makes your head hurt less, then use that. If you like super optimized code lines that are hard to read as a human being, then use the modulus, which is the % sign, math operation. If you understand that and use that in your code, and you showed code samples to more advanced programmers than yourself, that will make them happy that you're able to deal with more abstract things. But if it makes your head hurt, delete it out of there and pretend you never saw it, and my feelings will only be slightly hurt instead of completely hurt. I won't be crushed. I understand we do have math haters in the world. It's a sad, sad thing, but life is what it is. Something the same but different. We're going to talk about how to make things move. Just going to go back and save that real quick. Now this, I'm not going to bother changing my artwork. We understand how to bring in an array of images populated. In this case, I'm using my little blue face, and it's going to be able to move left, right, up, and down. Currently in the sample that's been provided, it only moves left and right. We're going to add into it the functionality of up and down. The way that we do this is we take notice of when you press a key down, and then we take notice of when that key has been released. Because then what we are going to do is set some Booleans. So when I press a key, it turns out every key on my keyboard has a number associated with it. This is called my ASCII code, my ASCII. So that is my ASCII code. So if you're ever going, oh crap, I know there's these key codes and I don't know what the numbers are, and how do I find that again? Well, it's ASCII code. So you can go wander yourself into a web browser, and then you can go ASCII codes. And we'll see there's tables that, and let's just see what this one is. And now it shows me for every character that's there, it has a number associated with it. We have special characters, standard, other ones. So we can go find these character codes that go with it. So we'll have arrow keys, there's space bar, there's shift, there's enter, return. All of it is there. The arrow keys, we're building something that we can move with the arrow keys. The arrow keys are 37, 38, 39, and 40. Left arrow is 37, and then we go around the clock in a clockwise manner. 37 for left, 38 for up, 39 for right, and 40 for the down arrow key. So we go clockwise starting with the left arrow key. 37, 38, 39, and 40. So when I press one of those keys, my computer sends out a signal and says, hey, guess what? Something happened. And we say, hey, if it happens to be that number we're looking for, in this case, we're looking for 37, 38, 39, or 40, we want to do something. Now, when I release a key, I'm also going to look for those same numbers. Now, whenever I press a key or release a key, we're going to set a Boolean value equal to true or false. True being the key is that key is pressed, false being that key has been released. So with these key codes that we're working with, I'm going to just look at the key pressed one. The key press, key release, they're the same things. Now, if we wanted to use space bars and shifts and enters or letter keys or other things, they all have numbers associated with them. We can just look for the code that is associated with that number. Now, a switch statement is like writing an if statement. So what I'm saying is, if the key code is equal to 37, set left equal to true. Else, if the key code is equal to 39, right is true. Else, if the key code is equal to 38, up is true. Else, if the key code is equal to 40, down is true. A switch statement is a little bit cleaner way when we're doing something where it's just this kind of really cut and dry, this number or this number or this number or this number of doing it, because I don't have as many curly braces. I think it actually makes it a little bit easier to read. So I could rewrite all of this using an if statement, and I will put that in right after it. Don't add this to your code or anything. I'm just putting it in for example purposes. But this is now serving the same purpose by saying if key code is equal to 37, left is equal to true. Else, if key code is equal to 39, right is equal to true. And then we continue our way down the line. So what I've just typed there is the same as saying switch and these first two. Now you'll notice a few things are different. We have the word switch here, we have the word case, and we have the word break. We haven't seen those before. Switch is by saying I'm going to, with the key code that I'm checking for, then there are these different cases that I'm looking for. The case of when it's 37 or when it's 39 or when it's 38 or when it's 40. So those are my cases or situations or events that we're looking for. Then we do what we want to have happen. But the one requirement on a switch is if this one happens to register, so the case of 37, yeah, I press the left arrow, then we set left equal to true. Then we have to say break. And what that does is says stop looking in the rest of the list, because otherwise something was true and it will now actually make the bottom one become true. That's one of the quirks on writing switches. When you use switches, you specify your cases, you put a colon here, and then at the end of each case gets rounded out by the word break. The most common mistake when writing a switch statement of code is you forget to put a break in. So if I forgot that but I press left, it would actually make down equal to true instead. It goes to the last one in the switch. That's just how a switch statement fails. So it's just something to keep in mind. So some people go, oh, that's too much newness in syntax and I don't want it. And you like more curly braces because you haven't had enough of trying to get curly braces to line up. So if you're a curly hater where your curly's continually like you're missing one and unexpected end of, and you're like, I'm going to put my fist through that screen if that doesn't go away. Maybe you want to give switch a chance. Switch it up. Can't hurt. Much better to use switch when you're doing something like this. Curly braces, when you have too many in a row, it will get ugly. So I would recommend if you can use a switch statement, you want to do it. Processing has one little iffy thing with switch statements. It only likes to do it with numbers, not with like strings or other sorts of things. So you have to do it with numerical values. Other languages don't care. You can do switch statements with pretty much anything and it's a happy day. But the most common place you will see it in programming is when we're doing, especially when we're doing kind of cycling through key codes and trying to make certain things happen with each key press. So once I press it, I make left true or I make right true, I make up true or down true, or false when I release the corresponding key. Now, to make my sprite move, we need a few things to happen here. So the sprite is going to have its x value updated by speed x. Speed x is going to be updated based on what key I've pressed. Now, this is where we do have to use some ugly ifs because we're not just doing one thing. We're doing, if left is true, we make speed x a negative value, so our little doohickey is going to fly off to the left. If I press right, I want it to be a positive value. If I am not pressing left or right, or if I'm not pressing, or if I am pressing left and right, so if I'm pressed both kind of opposite, left and right, they should kill each other, so I make speed x 0. Or if I'm not pressing either one, speed x is 0. Otherwise, the other possibility is I must be pressing one of those. And then I just modify x by that value. When I hit run, we get to watch it come up. There's my little blinking eyeball. I press right, it moves over. I press left, it moves over. Up and down, nothing's happening yet. So now the real challenge is how do we fit up and down in? And it probably is going to be as easy as copy paste this whole chunk of code here, change left to up, change right to down, and then change speed x's into speed y's, and you're probably in pretty good shape, and then your thing will start moving up and down. So I would challenge you to do that next.